Good evening, everyone. And we are now continuing with our exciting class on Pilegesh BaGiv'ah, the Concubine of Gibeah, and the repercussions. Now, we were just talking just to remind us of where we're at. Okay, so last week we had this horrible story of a man of a situation where I'll remind you, all of the norms have kind of deteriorated. We're kind of in a twilight zone where no one's acting the way they should be acting. A man's concubine cheats on him. She goes back to her father. He goes back after a month to get her. Her father seems really happy to see him, but won't let them leave. Finally, he goes out in the afternoon when he shouldn't. Therefore, he gets stuck in the middle of the night with nowhere to go. He goes to the Jewish town as opposed to the Jebusite town, the Israelite town as opposed to the Jebusite town. And it is a Benjaminite town. And in that Benjaminite town, there's someone who is not a Benjaminite, an Ephraimite, who invites him home. Again, very weird, very critical of Benjamin, where they're not doing the normal thing, which is to invite travelers home, okay? And instead, the person from Ephraim invites him home. We already find out that this husband is kind of a bit of a liar, or at least a fib teller, because he says, "Oh, I'm on pilgrimage to the temple," when we've never heard, or to the Mishkan, to the tabernacle. But we haven't heard him mention anything like that before. So we already know this guy, that the husband is kind of a little unreliable. And of course, what happens then is truly horrible. They're with the old man. The old man has invited them in. And in a story that is meant to be parallel to Sodom, even to an extreme, the men of Gibeah come wanting to rape the male guest, the husband, and the old man who is hosting him says, "He has a concubine and I have a daughter, you can take them instead." And this is, of course, is parallel to Lot's two daughters that he offers up to the men of Sodom instead of his male guests. Right, so that parallel is maintained by the two women, where really it's not enough. Why two women? Because it has to be parallel to the Sodom story. But what ends up happening is what ends up happening is that the husband simply shoves his concubine out the door, right? Knowing what's going to happen to her. She is horribly raped all night. The story does not let us get away with from the horribleness of it. She is raped and tormented all night. She is lying at dawn with her arm on the doorstep, dead. The husband comes out. He's like, "Get up, we're going." And she is dead. So he takes her on his donkey. He's got a pair of donkeys, but despite the fact that he has a pair of donkeys, it is her body that he cuts up to send to the tribes of Israel to rally them to the cause of taking revenge for this horrible act that has been done in the town of Gibeah, of Giv'ah. All of the tribes gather. They are all super upset without examining. And I'll remind you, we're going to start from here with kind of the result of him calling everyone together. And again, looking at the parallels, the important parallels that we have. On the one hand, of course, to the Sodom story, and on the other hand, to the story of Shaul, of Saul, the beginning of Saul. And I do, the more I look at this again, the more I agree with Sarah Milstein, who disagreed with me, and I think she was right, to say that this is kind of a critical story of Benjamin and Shaul. When I first read it, I read it as a story saying this is why a king is important, because Shaul is the first king, and he corrects what has been corrupted. But if we look at it, let's take a look. I'll share my screen now, and we'll take a look at the actual text. Here we have, let's take a look here. Actually, so I want to point out a couple of things here. So what we have is I'm gonna start from chapter 20, okay? Paragraph, the immediate aftermath of this man who is a Levite calling everyone together to avenge this horrible act that has been done in Giv'ah. ויצאו כל בני ישראל ותקהל העדה כאיש אחד למדן ועד באר שבע וארץ גלעד אל השם ישמעאל. So everyone, all the children of Israel, from Dan to Beersheba, come and that is obviously an exaggeration. It's not. They're not. That area is not that extent. Should not be fully under Israelite kind of rule this time. But it's this idea that everyone's coming together. And they're all, and they have 400,000, because I read this last, I'm going to do it relatively quick, 400,000 fighting men, like 400,000 fighting men with swords who are there. So they're ready to fight, okay? Actually, let's go back. Yeah, no, this is where he says the story. וישמעו בני בנימין כי עלו בני ישראל המצפה, ויאמרו בני ישראל דברו איך נהייתה הרעה הזאת. Okay, the children of Israel aren't there. They've heard that everyone's going up to Mitzpah, and all the other, and everyone else says, "Hey, where did this happen?" V'yana Isha Levi, the Levite answers, "Isha Nertzachah," the husband of the woman who was murdered, and he says, "Hagiv'ata asher leBinyamin, bati ani uPilegesh lalun." The Giv'ah that belongs to Benjamin, my Benjamin, right? I and my concubine came to sleep. Vayakumu alai ba'alei hagiv'ah, vayasobu alai et habayit laila, oti dimula harog, ve'et Pilegesh inu vatamot. And so the kind of owners of the Giv'ah, the people of the Giv'ah, they rose up against me. And they surrounded the house at night. They wanted to kill me and my concubine. They raped. You knew they tortured, but it means they raped her and she died. Now we know that that's not exactly what happened. They wanted to rape him, right? And he pushed his concubine out, and that's what they did. So we already know he's not telling the truth. Now we know on the one hand a horrible thing happened. That doesn't mean that the horrible thing didn't happen. But he is lying, okay? You understand why he's lying, because he looks horrible in the original story, but he's lying, okay? And I grabbed my concubine and I cut her up and I sent her out throughout all the fields of the portion of Israel, because they did a horrible thing in Israel. Okay, and he's now all the children of Israel decide what to do. Okay, and so they say, okay, none of us are going to go home. We're all as one man. We're all going to decide what to do without leaving, and we're going to do it. Okay, and so they decide we are going to we're gonna fight against Giv'ah. Right, we're gonna go up against we're gonna go up against it by lot because there are a lot of men, right? They don't. A tenth of 10 men for 100, a tenth of the tribes of Israel. They're gonna go to take and so because you have to have some of them getting provisions, right? Some will get provisions and some will fight. All right. ויאסף כל איש ישראל אל העיר כאיש אחד חברי. And all the men gathered against the city as one man, all together, all friends, all companions, right? So what's going on here? It's describing it very positively. Everyone's of one mind. They're all agreeing. Okay, what's the problem here? The problem here is they're acting by definition. They're acting without really considering, because they're like, no one's going home until we decide what to do. We're deciding right now. That's it. We're deciding right now, right? That's by definition, they're not doing the correct consideration. And second, they are relying on a guy that we know is an unreliable narrator. That's what you're not supposed to do whenever you deliver collective punishment. Let's look at, and I mentioned this last time, but let's look inside at some examples, right? So in terms of God and stone, right? When he says, this is the wrong chapter here. Okay. Let me find it here. Okay. Here he says, Vayomer Adonai zakat stom v'amara ki rabba v'chatatam ki chavda ma'od. God says, this is in Genesis 18, Bereshit Yudchet, verse 20, Pasuk Chaf. Okay, so God says the cry of Sodom and Amorah has risen because it's great and their sin is very heavy. Erdana ve'er'eh hakitzakata haba'a elai asukala ve'imlo ed'ah. Right? I'm going to go down and I'm going to check. I'm going to see, as according to this cry that's coming to me, is that what they did or not? Right? Here, God is modeling the behavior that humans are supposed to do. They hear a horrible thing has happened. The cry comes to them. They're supposed to go and check, is it true? They're not supposed to just react. Now, similarly, with the rule of Ir Nidachat, and here I'm reading from Dvarim Yud Gimel, Deuteronomy 13. Okay. And here I'm just going to paraphrase Psukim Yud Gimel to Yudalid, verses 13 to 14. If you hear essentially that a city, everyone's going and worshiping idols, right? And here in verse 15, Tedvav, V'darashta v'chakarta v'sha'alta hetev, and you should go and inquire and seek out and ask very well. V'hinei emet nachon hadavar, and behold, this thing is actually true. This horrible thing is done in you. And then there's this pretty horrific collective punishment that's delivered on the city, right? But first, and note the three different verbs that you're using here. Seek out, inquire, ask. You need to make sure before you do anything like this, you must be sure that this is what is going on. You guys all see the verses that I'm pointing out, right? That's what you see on your screen? Okay, terrific. And so this is, it's super important, especially if, and you can imagine, especially if you're in a situation, now we don't generally do this, right? You're punishing a whole group, right? And if something outrageous has happened, you need to make sure this is true. You can't just go by what one guy says. And that's exactly what they're doing in our story. Okay, this one guy says something, they're not investigating, they're not considering. And remember, and I'll remind you, in the framework that this is in Shoftim and Judges, is that this is a time when there is no king over Israel. So there's no king over Israel. There's no one to say, let's take a step back, let's consider if we do this, then this other thing's going to happen. So for example, what's going to happen, which is a civil war with Binyamin, a king would generally not allow that to happen. A king would say, okay, let's talk diplomatically, let's reach some agreement, let's see what needs to be done, right? But because it's every tribe for himself and also a very emotional reaction to a horrible act, this is what we get, this is what we end up with. So let's take a look and continue reading. So here everyone's agreed. They listen to this guy's story, which we know is not exact, and that's it. They are ready to go. Now I'm going to remind you also, this guy cut her up into pieces to send to the tribes of Israel, which is also, we are meant to be shocked and horrified by what this guy has done. Not only has she died because at least partially of his actions, her body has been desecrated. We are meant to be saying, oh my God, her body was desecrated, right? And we are especially meant to be saying that because in comparison to Saul, to Shaul, who does a similar act to gather all the tribes together, what he does is he cuts up an ox. In other words, at great expense to himself, he cuts up an ox. Because oxen are expensive. He cuts up an ox and he sends it out and he says, this is what's going to happen to your oxen if you don't gather and help me fight. That's what Saul does. I can show you, I believe it is here. This is when I'm going to, let's take a look at this because there are several parallels between this and our story, okay? So we have here, This is in the beginning of the book of Samuel of Shmuel. This is after Shaul has been chosen to be king. This is his first real act as king, because just because you say this guy's your king, that doesn't make him king. Here he shows that he can be king, right? And what happens? The people Nachash, the Ammonite, the Ammoni, is camps by Yavesh Gilad, and the people of Yavesh Gilad said, "We'll surrender." And he's like, "Yeah, if you're going to surrender, you'll have to all pluck out your right eyes." And they're like, "Oh my God!" Like, okay, so they said, so the elders said, "Give us 7 days to think about it." All right, and they send out messengers throughout all of Israel for help. They've got 7 days to get help. Okay, by Malachim Giv'at Shaul, and they came to Giv'ah, the Giv'ah of Shaul, right? By Yidabru Hadvarim Boznei, and they said these things to the nation. By Yis'ul Kol Ha'am et Kolam Vayivku, and all the nation raised their voices and wept. V'hinei Shaul ba achrei bakar min hasadeh, vayomer Shaul mala am ki yivku. Now this is like he's not much of a king yet, right? He's coming after his cattle in the field, right? The cattle are with the yoke, and he's walking behind the cattle. He sees everyone crying. He's like, "What's going on?" And they told him what the people of Yavesh Gilad had said. But Titzlach Ruach Elohim al Shaul kisham'o et advarim ha'ele vayichar apo ma'od, and a divine spirit rested on Shaul, and when he heard these things, and he got very angry. Vayikach semen bakar v'yinakei. He took actually a pair of, not just one. He took a pair of oxen, and he cut them up. Vayishalach b'chol gvul Yisrael biyad hamalachim, and when they sent it out to the borders of Israel by messengers, saying, "Asher einenu yotzei achrei Shaul v'achar Shmuel kol ye'aseh livkaro vayipol b'hachad Hashem al ha'am ve'yetzu ki ish echad." And he said, anyone who doesn't come after Shaul and Shmuel and Samuel, this is what will be done to his cattle. And everyone got scared. Everyone got the fear of God. And they all went out as one man, right? It's like in here, one man, but they're all going one man to fight Nachash Ammoni, to fight the Ammonites, right? And to bring salvation to the men of Yavesh Gilad. Okay, so what we'll see is there are a lot of parallel place names here, but also actions. So as opposed to Shaul cutting up oxen with a real reason, saying this is what's going to happen to your oxen, this guy cut up his concubine without a real reason and sends her out, despite the fact that he has a pair of donkeys. He has a pair of donkeys that we are told about twice in the story. They're mentioned. He's got a pair of donkeys. Why didn't he cut up the pair of donkeys? They're cheaper than oxen, right? But no. Well, you know what's cheaper than a pair of oxen? A concubine's body, apparently. Right? He is pretty horrible. We're not supposed to be on his side too much, right? We're supposed to say this concubine is horrible things have been done to her and continue to be done. All right. There's very little justice for her in the story. Okay. So again, this parallel. So again, I read it originally. The parallel is showing that this is kind of what's corrupt. In other words, this is the corrupt version. And Saul and Shaul fixes it. In other words, Shaul's action is right and just and brings everyone to a just war, right? To save Yavesh Gilad. Whereas this action, when there is no king, brings everyone to a civil war where they're fighting between the tribes, right? This is the difference between no king and king, right? There's another way to read it, and this is what I was mentioning, what Sarah Milstein has written about, which is that this is actually meant to critique Shaul and kind of cast a pall on this great story of his. like do a nastier. Now, she actually takes it really far. She thinks that the Levite is supposed to be Shaul. That I don't see. I think that's really, she has to make a few kind of leaps there to get from Shaul to a Levite. She's like, oh, he was originally, she has to do the whole Shaul and Shmuel were originally kind of the same character. Like she has to do a bunch of things to get to the Levite being Shaul. So I don't think that that you could go that far, but you could absolutely read this as it's actually taking the Shaul story and corrupting it and making it so it's not so great, right? Or like the way I originally read it, you can read it as this is meant to be a companion piece to the Shaul story, where Shaul is doing everything right, whereas without a king, you do everything wrong. However, it's hard not to say that the fact that you're saying that all the men of Giv'ah, all the Benjaminite men of Giv'ah did this horrible thing, and the only guy who's hosting people is from Ephraim, it's hard not to see that as a critique of Binyamin and of, let's say, the Shaul camp, right? If you think in terms of the history, right? Because there's the Binyaminites and Shaul, and then there's David from Yehudah. Here, right? Here, the concubine is actually, if we go back a chapter, you can see the concubine is actually from Bethlehem. She's actually from Bethlehem, which is David's city, right? The place that they don't go to be hosted is Yevus, which will become Jerusalem, right? So there's a lot of parallels here where kind of the good guys are Yehudah and the bad guys are Binyamin, and you have that set up already, which does lend credence to this idea that this actually is meant to be kind of a way of kind of casting a pall on Shaul and Binyamin in general, right? Not just within the context of saying you need a king. You need a king, right? Because this is what happens without a king. But we're gonna continue looking at also the kind of what it's saying about what it means to not have a king as well. Okay, so here let's continue. I'm gonna pause. Does anyone have a question here? Yeah, Joel, go for it, but I can't hear you.
Just it's general, but it's a stereotype of quote unquote the Old Testament. I have a friend who's very Catholic. I occasionally go to church with them, and sometimes they talk. Over the years I've heard about the Old Testament God versus the New Testament, the primitive. But all I'm saying is, and two rights don't make a wrong. When you think of what's happening today in Ukraine, some of the headlines, which I won't go into, the mutilation of bodies and the mass rapes. And I went a few years ago in the South to Museum of Lynching. It's a big civil rights museum and relatively new.
Oh, that sounds horrible.
Yeah, but the mutilations of the bodies, again, I won't go into detail, but it's not that different from the story.
That's a good point. It's clearly meant to be yet another violence that is done to the concubine. You're not supposed to be, people sometimes mistake, especially biblical stories, the same way they mistake sometimes rabbinic stories. They'll say, oh, a rabbi does this in this story, we're supposed to think it's good. You're not always supposed to think it's good when you have a Talmudic story about a rabbi. Sometimes it's meant to really critique the rabbi, right? Here, it's meant, the Levite is crappy. The Levite is doing really awful things, and the concubine, who is completely mute in this entire story, right? That entire story, everything she has the only piece of agency she had was cheating on him, honestly, and running away to her father. That was the piece of agency she had. After that, we don't hear anything about what she wants. Does she want to go back with him? Her father seems to be happy. We don't know what her feelings are in any of this story. We don't know why she did what she did. We have no idea. And she's simply the ultimate, she's the ultimate victim, right? That is the role she plays in the story. She is the victim. No matter what you say, she is the victim, right? And you can't say I mean, you can't call this, like, I'm not saying this is a feminist work, and it's not a feminist work because she's a victim. That's her role in the story, right? In terms of the narrative, her role is simply to be the horribly hard done by person, right? In the story. And yeah, and it's truly horrible. And they don't, and again, it doesn't make it, it's very, very clear that, like, for example, that she's raped to death, right? And it's very clear they do it all night, right? Like, it makes it very clear that it's horrible, right? And then afterwards, and we'll see, and I think part of it also is what the story ends up coming to, we're also supposed to think is horrible. And that's something that, that's something that also people say, oh no, this is the solution. I'm like, no, you're supposed to be like, that's the solution? That's not a solution. We'll get to it, okay? I won't, you probably know, but just in case, I'm not giving spoilers, okay? So
Miriam,
yes.
I also have a general question about the big picture, but I'd like to leave it till the end of the shiur.
Okay, sure. Thanks. So, okay, here we go. So if we go back to our story, okay, so they've all said we're going up against Giv'ah. Vayishlchu shiftei Yisrael anashim b'chol shiftei Binyamin lemor ma hara'ah hazot asher niyata b'chem. And the tribes of Israel sent men among all the tribes of Binyamin to say, what is this evil that was done among you? And now give over the men, the amoral men that are in Giv'ah, and we will kill them. We're gonna kind of burn out the evil from Israel. And the children of Benjamin did not want to hear, they didn't want to obey, really, what their brethren of Israel said, the children of Israel said. So the members of Benjamin went from their cities all to Giv'ah to go to war against Israel. Okay, so now you have a full-fledged civil war over Giv'ah, right? Now, again, if you're a king, you could see this coming, right? You could be like, what do you think is going to happen, given that everyone has loyalty to their tribe first at this point? What do you think is going to happen when you say that Benjamin give up Giv'ah? They're not going to give up Giv'ah so easily, and then you are all going to be at war. Now, what we're going to see is that Benjamin are fearsome fighters, so it's not a small thing. So you've got, from Benjamin, you've got 26,000 people with swords, and from the people of Giv'ah itself, 700. So, and then you have this idea that there were 700 who were left-handed. And they could sling stones and not miss. It's not clear what being left-handed had to do with this. Does it mean that they had a certain move? They were more flexible, like they could, or is it something that helps in terms of a slingshot? But at any rate, they're good. They're good fighters. And the children of Israel had 400,000 soldiers. Okay, so they way outnumber Benjamin, right? So it should be an easy thing, right? Vayikumu vayalu Beit El, vayishalu Elohim, vayimru b'nei Israel, mi ya'aleh lanu batchila lemilchama b'nei Benjamin, vayomer Adonai Yehuda batchila. Okay, so they went up to Beit El. Note that there is no mention of where the Mishkan is at this time, right? It's, is the Mishkan actually, like, it's supposed to be in Shiloh, but is there something actually? Now, we know there's supposed to be a temple, and there's a traditional holy place for a temple in Bethel, because we know from the story of Yaakov, right? He's like, I'm going to essentially build an altar to God in Bethel. So it's not a surprise they go to Bethel at the same time, and they ask God. In other words, they ask God. They ask either for a prophecy or an oracle, and they say, "Mi alelanu batchila lemilchama bnei Binyamin." Who is going to begin the war? Like, who's going to be in the front? And the answer is Yehuda. Again, remember the parallels if we're talking about David against Shaul. So Yehuda, Judah is going to begin the fight. So anyway, they go, they camp out opposite Gibeah, and they all go out to war, and Binyamin wins. Binyamin wins. They kill 22,000 men, which is pretty crazy, right? ויתחזק העם איש ישראל, ויוסיפו לערוך מלחמה במקום אשר ערכו שם ביום הראשון. But Israel is not giving up. They're going to keep going. So the second day they're going to have war again. ויעלו בני ישראל ויבכו לפני Hashem ad ha'erev. The Israelites go up before God, in other words, either before an altar, before a tabernacle, before some kind of temple, and they cry to God until evening. Vayishalu v'Hashem lemor, they ask God, saying, "Ha'osif lageshet lemilchama im bnei Binyamin achi." Now all of a sudden it's my brother, right? If 22,000 people got killed, they're like, really? He says, should I continue going to war against the children of Binyamin, my brother? Vayomer Hashem alu elav, and God says, "No, go up against him." Vayikruvu bnei Yisrael bnei Binyamin mayom hasheni. They went up against them the second day, and this time they kill 18,000 people. Binyamin kills 18,000 people, 18,000 soldiers, right? So once again, they go up to Bethel and they cry and they sit before God. Vayitzumu bayom hahu ad ha'arev, and they fast until the evening. Vayalu olotu shlamim, they bring whole offerings and peace offerings. Peace offerings they eat, right? Peace offerings you're just sacrificing stuff that you can't eat, the fat, the blood, etc. Whereas a whole offering you're sacrificing everything. And they bring these different types of sacrifices before God. Vayishalu bnei Yisrael b'Hashem b'sham aron brit Elohim bayamim hahem, and they ask for God, and that is where the Ark of the Covenant is in that time. Now, again, not in Shiloh, in Bethel, right? Apparently, you've got the Ark of the Covenant in Bethel. It's telling you why is it important? Because it's going to say this has the seal of approval. This is not just this. They're really asking God. They've got the Ark of the Covenant is there. Pinchas ben Elazar ben Aharon omed lefanav. Pinchas, the son of Elazar, the son of Aharon, the first priest, is standing there. So you've got like this. There's no way you could argue with is this for real, right? And they ask how Sif od letzet lemilchama bnei Binyamin achi im echdal. And you see how it changes. Like he said before, they were just saying, should I still go up to war against my brother Binyamin, right? That was and now they're saying, should I still go up to war against my brother, the children of Binyamin, the members of Binyamin, my brother, or should I stop? Let's give it a choice here, right? Vayomer Hashem alu ki machar etnenu biyadecha. And God says, go up, because tomorrow I will give him into your hand. Okay, so now this is it. They have a certified priest. They've got the Ark of the Covenant. They said, do we go up or something? And God's like, no, keep going. This time you're going to get them. So what do? They go over the third, but what they do is Vayasem Yisrael Orvim El Giv'ah Saviv. So what they do is they set an ambush essentially around Giv'ah. Binyamin goes out, and this is a classic move that this is not the only place that we read about it in the Bible. Bnei Binyamin go out. They are separated from the city. Hantikum in Ha'ir, right? They're separated out from the city. And they are starting to kill Israel like they did before, like they did every time before. במסילות אשר אחת עולה בית אל ואחת גבעת בשדה כ-30 איש בישראל. So they're going on the two roads, one that goes up to Beit El and one that's in the field of Giv'ah, killing about 30 people. ויאמרו בני בנימין ניגפים הם לפנינו כבראשונה. And the children of Benjamin say, they are being they're like falling to us like they did the first time or previously. Uvnei Israel amru nanusa unitaknuhu min ha'ir el ha'mesilot. And they said, okay, we're going to run and we're going to disconnect them, right, from the city by the roads. V'chol ish Yisrael kamu mimkomo v'yarchu b'val tamar. These are places, you know, that I'm not the best with geography, but they all go out and essentially they get Binyamin, they lure Binyamin away from Giv'ah. They come out, they ambush Giv'ah, right? ויבואו מנגד לגבעה 10,000 איש בחור מכל ישראל במלחמה כבדה והם לא ידעו כי נוגעת עליהם הרע. So then they come out 10,000 young men from Israel. The fighting is hard and they don't know that evil has touched them. Okay, so they don't know, on the one hand, they don't know, they're busy fighting. They don't know about that there's an ambush that also is going to go behind them and get Gibeah. ויגוף השם את בנימין לפני ישראל והשחיתו בני ישראל בבנימין ביום ההוא 25,100 איש. Okay, כל אלה שלא קרב. So on the one hand, this is happening, and also Benjamin starts to fall to Israel by God's hand, right? God is smiting them, and Israel kills 25,100 people, all of them soldiers. And so they see that they were smitten, and the people of Israel let them kind of fall back because they were pretty confident in this ambush. The ambushers then go. It's not really a pincer movement. I want to call it a pincer movement just because it's the only one I know, but it's not really a pincer movement. It's a classic thing that they do where they drew them away from the city. At the same time as the fighting was hard, they come in, they ambush the city itself, which is left defenseless, and now that city is also gone, right? We also are similar to this. We're used to this kind of imagery, that what happens is the soldiers are away from the city. They look and they see the smoke rising from the city. Okay. So this is so they see the smoke rising from the city. So at the same time, actually Israel's falling back. Benjamin is stronger, and they're like, oh, they're gonna fall like they did before. But the smoke is rising from the city. So Binyamin, they're in the middle of what they think is a victory. They turn around and they see the smoke rising from the burning city. Right? But so at that point, the tide of war turns once again. Israel starts winning because Benjamin is like, everything's lost. The evil, I'm going to translate here as the evil has touched the city. Evil has touched Benjamin because the city itself is fallen. Okay, now the city is not empty. The city is full of people who aren't fighters. The city is full of women and children, right? So that's what's burning. They look back and their cities are burning, okay? ויפנו לפני איש ישראל אל דרך המדבר והמלכה הדביקתו ואשר מהרים משחיתים אותו בתוכו. And so so essentially the war is really turned against Benjamin. Anyone who's in the cities, any fighting men who are still in the cities or coming out of the cities are being killed. Kitcheru at Benjamin here, they surrounded Benjamin and chased them. Menucha hidvichuhu ad nochach hagiv'ah mimizrach shamesh. So they I'm not sure if Menucha Hidvichuhu really means they overtook them to the resting place, but it's very poetic, right? And it rhymes. Kitruat Binyamin Hidvichuhu, Menucha Hidvichuhu, right? It sounds like a little piece of maybe war poetry, actually, until Gibeah in the east. Vayiplu, ויפלו מבנימין 18,000 איש את כל אלה אנשי חיל. And from Benjamin 18,000 men fell, all of them men of valor. And I don't think men of valor is not just saying all of them were soldiers, because we've seen how they say all of them were soldiers, all of them shoftei chel, all of them hold swords. Here's like all of them were men of Benjamin fought tremendously well and hard and bravely. You can't get away with this in the story. They were outnumbered tremendously. They won. They were brave. They were good fighters. In this way, you could say, well, maybe this isn't a critique of all of Benjamin, it's a critique of Giv'ah, but to say, but Benjamin, they're strong fighters. They're brave. They really, ויפנו וינוסו המדבר אל סלע הרימון ויעלו במסילות 5,000 איש והדביקו אחריו עד גדעון ועקרו ממנו 2,000 איש. They can't get away, so they keep on killing more and more of them. ויהי כל הנופלים מבנימין 25,000 איש שולף חרב ביום ההוא. And on that day, the fallen of Benjamin were 25,000 soldiers. את כל אלה אנשי חיל, all of them men of valor. ויפנו וינוסו המדברה אל סלע הרימון 600 איש וישבו בסלע הרימון 4 חודשים. So there were 600 men who got away, and they stayed in the rock of Sela Rimon. They stayed there for 4 months. Why? Because they've got nowhere to go back to. They're just hiding out. They don't want to die, right? ואיש ישראל שבו אל בני בנימין ויקום לפי חרב מעיר מתום עד בהמה עד כל הנמצא גם כל הערים הנמצאות שלחו באש. Now we were just reading about a battle about Giv'ah. Now Israel goes and wipes out all their cities. Now I want to note the escalation here, okay? We started with the rape of a concubine, which we could at least partly blame her husband for, partly, okay? Also, the whole weird thing going around, they're staying, they're leaving, everything like that. They shouldn't have been there in the first place, right? And then we said, okay, Giv'ah is going to suffer. Then it's a civil war with Benjamin. Now, even after they won against Benjamin, they burn down Giv'ah, they go and they wipe out all Benjamin cities. Right? This kind of escalation that can happen, particularly in war, right? Where they're just so upset. Is there any thought here? Has anyone said, wait a second, now we're done? No, they go out and they wipe out Benjamin. Okay, so this is like, you started with an outrage, but it's gone way out of hand now. Yeah, you were angry at Benjamin. Benjamin killed a lot of their men. Like, they're also upset. They also lost, right? You wiped out their cities, right? But that is in fact what they did, okay? Once again, the idea is if you had a king, that's not what would happen. The king would be like, okay, Giv'ah's gone, now we stop. No, they just keep going. They wipe out all the cities of Benjamin. Okay. And now we learn of a tremendously stupid thing that they managed to do, again, out of this pure outrage. Again, remember, we started with something which was in fact outrageous and horrible. We're not saying that it wasn't outrageous and horrible. We're saying, look at what it comes to when there's no one who's on the brakes. There's no one saying, wait, wait, stop, think, right? No one's saying that, and this is where we get to. Okay, what did they do? What did they do? V'ish Yisrael nishba b'mitzvah. I'm reading now from chapter 21, paragraph Aleph. V'ish Yisrael nishba b'mitzvah lemor, ish mimenu lo yiten bitola b'nyamin leisha. They all took an oath saying they wouldn't marry their daughters to Binyamin. They're also angry at Binyamin, right? Now, this was before the war, right? They weren't thinking in terms of we're going to wipe out Binyamin. They were saying, we're so angry at Binyamin and we're fighting them over Giv'ah, we're never going to give our daughters to Binyamin, right? But now they've wiped out their cities. What were in their cities? Women and children, right? Now what are these Binyaminites going to do, right? Vayavo ha'am Bet El, v'yeshvu sham ad ha'erev lifnei Elohim, v'yisbihu kulam, v'yivku b'chi gadol. And they all go to Bethel. They sit there till the evening in front of God, and they lift their in front of God, or in front of, essentially in front of the place of worship also, like, because it's using it's saying Elohim, so it's making a distinction, but at any rate, they lift up their voices and they weep. Vayomru Lama Adonai Elohei Yisrael haytazot Yisrael lipaked hayom Yisrael shevet echad. And they say, why God, why Lord God of Israel, was this in Israel to essentially to remove a tribe from Israel? Why was it? Because they did a bunch of really stupid things without thinking. That's why it was. Right? Now, it's not like they did. Now, they got, well, God said, keep fighting. God said, keep fighting after they were already starting to fight, right? They had already decided they're going to fight, right? And they said, who should go first? So God says, Yehuda should go first. Only on the second day, they start asking, should we not fight them, right? That point, the die is cast. I mean, that's the way you can read it. You can also read it that God, it's hard. I'm not saying it's theologically difficult, because God after day one is kind of egging them on. He's like, no, you keep fighting, right? At the same time, this whole thing was done by them. It was done by them. Like, oh God, why did you remove a tribe? What? Who was the one who started the fight? You guys said we're going to fight the whole tribe if they won't give Giv'ah up. And then you made this stupid oath. And then you burn their cities. What? Right? But now they're crying. They feel really bad now. Okay, they feel really bad now. This is why it really does remind me of, in not at all this with the same repercussions, but when you have this kind of Twitter outrage wars, and they get like someone fired or worse, because people are sometimes mentally, it's very challenging to be in these, and then like, oh, I didn't mean to get him fired, though. I didn't mean them to lose their job. Like, yeah, no, you just made sure everyone knew what a tremendous jerk they were, and made sure that like they would get back to their employer. That's like, yeah, okay, I believe you. I believe that they did not want to completely wipe out Binyamin, but they completely wiped out Binyamin, right? That is in fact what they did, and so here. Here we have, so they're like, now they're crying. Now they're like, so what happens? They wake up, they're like, well, it's another day. They build an altar, they bring sacrifices. Vayomru b'nei Yisrael. Mi asher lo alav kahal mikol shiftei Yisrael el Adonai ki hashvuah gdola hayta lasher lo ala el Adonai hamitzvah lemor mot yumat. And now there's another oath that we find out about. They're like, who didn't come from all of the tribes of Israel to fight in this battle? Because we made an oath that anyone who doesn't come dies. Okay, so who is that going to be? Now we'll understand soon why they're asking this now. Why are they asking this now? The time to ask this is when you're about to fight the war. Who didn't come? No, they're asking now. Who didn't come? Vayenachamu b'nei Yisrael el Binyamin achiv, vayomru nigdah hayom shevet echad miYisrael. And the children of Israel felt bad for Binyamin, his brother, and they said, a tribe has been pulled out of Israel. today. Remember, there are a few hundred survivors. So what will we do for the ones who are left for wives? But we swore we weren't going to give them our daughters. So they've got to marry now, and we burned their sisters. Any women that they had are dead now, right? That's the idea. The idea is that any women that they had are gone, right? And we said we wouldn't marry our daughters to them. So what are we going to do? So who didn't come to fight? Yavesh Gilad. Guys, where did we hear about Yavesh Gilad in the beginning of this class? Not from this chapter. Yavesh Gilad is the city that Shaul saves, right? That's Yavesh Gilad is the city that Shaul saves. Here, it's a city that's now doomed because they didn't come to fight. You don't believe me? That's the city that Shaul saves. Here he saves them. I'm going to Shmuel Aleph, Yud Aleph, right? 1 Samuel chapter 11. Here we are. It's the people of Yavesh Gilad who are under threat from the Ammonites. Okay, so they're the ones that are in fact saved because Shaul calls on all the tribes of Israel to save Yavesh Gilad. It's the exact opposite of this. As opposed to calling all the tribes of Israel to wipe out Binyamin, Shaul called all the tribes of Israel to save Yavesh Gilad. And in our story, it's Yavesh Gilad that didn't come to fight for everyone else against Binyamin. So what is going to happen? So what do? They kill everyone. I'm just going to say it. They kill everyone from Yavesh Gilad and all the wives. They take the virgins. They're like, look, we've got women for Binyamin. It's like, this is horrible. It's horrible. We're supposed to realize this is horrible, right? Like, we're not supposed to be like, yay. We're like, what are you doing? Right? So this is what they're doing. They're killing more people. Now they're killing people not for Binyamin. They're killing people from Yavesh Gilad, right? And so any
Yavesh Gilad is Shevet Gad?
Honestly, I don't remember offhand. You guys can look it up while I'm continuing and then let me know.
As far as I remember, it is. I'm not 100%. I'm quite sure it's Shevet Gad.
I can look it up.
It's Ever Yarden, right?
Oh, I see. There's a comment also. So I'm just going to finish this, and then I'm going to go to the comment or question. There are a whole bunch of them. Sorry about this. Okay, so I have to go over them at the end. Sorry, I missed the questions. So here, anyway, so that's what they do, right? And remember, they kill the women too. Any woman who is not a virgin gets killed, right? Any woman who's a wife is killed, right? So what do? They have 400 young virgin women who've never been with a man, right? And they bring them to Shiloh in the land of Canaan, right? So it's interesting they have to say that Shiloh is in the land of Canaan. It's a little strange, right? So then they send out, so they've got 400 women that they got by killing the people of Yavesh Gilad. They killed the people of Yavesh Gilad not because they did anything truly bad, but because they didn't join the war. So they killed the people of Yavesh Gilad, they get the 400, and they only do this at the end because they need the women. Do you understand what's going on? Like, it's insane, right? So they have the 400 women that they got by killing the people of Yavesh Gilad for the reason of them not coming to war, right? So they have the women, and now they're going to call what's left of the Benjaminites, right? Now they're going to call Binyamin, the guys who are left from Binyamin, who meanwhile are still hiding out in Sela Rimon, right? So they go, they send to them, and they say, Vaikru'u lahem shalom, and they call them peace. וישב בנימין בעת ההיא, ויפנו להם אנשים אשר חיו מנשי יבש גלעד, ולא מצאו להם כן. Okay, so they gave them the 400 women that they just killed Yavesh Gilad for. And it's not enough for them. Lomatz ulam ken. You remember that ken in biblical Hebrew does not mean yes, right? Ken means appropriate or right, or in this case, enough. Usually it means substantive, you know. So va'am nicham leBinyamin k'asah Hashem peretz b'shivtei Yisrael. And the nation felt bad for Benjamin because God created this gap in the tribes of Israel, clearly. So the elders of the community said, what are we going to do for the rest of them for wives? Because there's 600 young men, and they only had 400 women from Yavesh Gilad. Because all the women are destroyed from Benjamin. They've all been killed. Like who? What other woman was killed? We started with a concubine who's raped and killed, and we end up killing all the women of Binyamin, right? That's where we've gotten to in these brilliant moves that these tribes are making, again, without a considered ruler. Vayomru, Yerushat Pleitala Binyamin v'lo yimacheh shevet Yisrael. They said, okay, we can't let this tribe die out of Israel. We can't do it because we took this oath. So we can't fix it. We ourselves, we're the ones making the decisions. We can't actually give up our own daughters to Binyamin because we made an oath. So we can't do that ourselves. We can't fix it ourselves. What is our fix going to be? They say, okay, there's always been a holiday for God in Shiloh, and then they tell you where Shiloh is. Again, there's an assumption in the story that the Mishkan, the tabernacle, is not in Shiloh. People have to be directed to where Shiloh is, right? Because the holy place here is Bethel. So it's the geography of the story doesn't match what we're familiar with from the book of Shmuel. And so that needs to be pointed out, right? So because they're telling you how to get to Shiloh. They're like, it's north of Bethel, northeast of Bethel. You go on this road. This is how you get there, right? And I know that we've gone a little bit over, but we're getting to the end here. And they tell they tell the children of Benjamin, say, you go and you hide in the vineyards, right? And I'm going to paraphrase this. We all know it. When the girls come out to dance, you come out and you grab the girls. You grab them and you take them back to the land of Benjamin, right? And when their fathers and their brothers come to not just to argue with us, but almost to bring a legal claim against us, how could you? Because remember, the girl belongs to the family. The people who protect the daughter are the fathers and the brothers, right? So they're going to say, what the hell, right? This is not okay, right? What? Right? He says, look, let them have it. Let them have it. They don't have wives. And this way, you're not guilty of breaking your oath. You're not guilty of breaking your oath. Let them have it. So we started with a rape and we end with more rapes, right? Again, we started with a death of a woman and we ended with many more deaths of women, right? The idea is that if you don't follow, first of all, investigating, and second of all, thinking before you do these things, right? You end up with a much worse injustice than what you started with. And that's why you need a kid. Right, that is really the lesson here. Okay. Now here it's very clear. It says, and that's what the children of Benjamin did. They took wives to their numbers from the from the ones that they danced, that they stole, that they took. And they went and they lived in their portion, and they settled in their cities. Right? Now, again, this doesn't say great things about Benjamin either, right? That they're willing to just take these women. That's what they did? Sure, okay. We'll just grab these women. And also it says bad things. If you're reading this as a history, it says bad things about Benjamin. Now, they're all descendants, or a lot of them are descended from these very kind of weird matches, right? Weird, kind of illegal, kind of immoral matches. ויתהלכו משם בני ישראל בעת ההיא, איש לשבטו ולמשפחתו, ויצאו משם איש לנחלתו. And the people of Israel, they all went home. Each went to his tribe and to his family, and they left there each man to his portion. בימים ההם אין מלך בישראל, איש הישר בעיניו יעשה. In those days, there was no king in Israel. Each person did what was right in his eyes. The end, right? They all went home. They're like, we solved it. They all went home. And the fact is, and this is what happens when there's no king in Israel. So let's take a look. So on the one hand, it shows what happens when there's no king in Israel. On the other hand, it's tremendous contrast to the Saul story, to the Shaul story. Again, here they kill Yavesh Gilad, Shaul saves Yavesh Gilad, right? Here a man cuts up his concubine and causes a civil war. Shaul cuts up his oxen and brings all of Israel in battle against the Ammonites. So you can read, depending on how you want to read. No, either way of reading it, by the way, says that this story was written after, in response to the Shaul story. Okay, either one, right? But you can either see it as this is explaining why Shaul fixes the problems of Benjamin and why Shaul is the king, right? He comes and he does the right thing as opposed to what happens without a king. Or it's like, oh, Benjamin sucks. The story of Shaul, there's this nasty-ish kind of other way of thinking about that sort of thing. And where does all of Benjamin come from? And this is what happened in Shaul's city in Gibeah, and whereas Yehudah fights against Benjamin, right? Yehudah leads the battle against Benjamin, right? So this, but still this idea of you need a king, you have to have a king, right? Why? Again, the reason for the king is so that the outrage doesn't carry you. So the outrage doesn't carry you to further and further outrages. And once again, we come back to the idea of that's why you have to consider at the beginning. You don't just act out of outrage, because when you act out of outrage, you get to even greater outrages, right? And again, a lot of people read this as, oh yeah, that is actually supposed to have solved it. No, it's actually supposed to be an outrage. It isn't that we're supposed to think that all these rapes solved a rape. We're supposed to say, oh my God, this is what happens without a king, right? This is what happens when just a bunch of tribes get together and decide we're going to create moral justice. Right? We're going to create moral justice. Well, did you? No, you really, really didn't. Okay. So here I'm going to now turn to some of these questions. So Moshe, and my apologies for missing them earlier. They just weren't in front of me. So Moshe Matitya asks, in terms of the narrative, how big a deal is it really that the Israelites didn't investigate the story? The outrage did in fact happen, correct? Even if the Levite fudged some details to make himself look better. So if they had investigated, they still would have done the same thing in the end. I'm not 100% sure. I'll say in a second why. This aspect would be much more powerful if the story had been a lie, but the Israelites had believed it and decimated Benjamin anyway. Again, I think the point, and obviously you're hearing my interpretation here, I think the point is that it happened. And I think the point is, I think it would be a different thing if it hadn't happened. If it hadn't happened, you would say, it's all because of this guy's lie. No, it's not all because of this guy's lie. A horrible thing happened. And the question is, how do you handle a horrible thing that happens? And I think that the idea is that there is, even though this is obviously kind of an extreme story and it's made to be extreme, the idea is that the black and white thing is not exactly what happened. The point is that there's nuance here. The point is, yeah, the people of Giv'ah are horrendous. They killed her. But this guy's not great either. He also has to bear some responsibility. A guy who pushes his concubine out to a murderous mob bears some responsibility. Okay. And if they had heard that, if they had investigated, they'd seen these sides of the story, they would have had to think. It's not that the outrage didn't happen. It's that they wouldn't think, they wouldn't consider, they wouldn't say, what is the actual just outcome? Right? And that's why for this lesson to be learned, you need the story to be true. To say, yes, an outrage actually did happen. Because
All right,
if it's a lie, then it's all on the Levites.
That still
Yeah.
wouldn't absolve the residents of
No,
Gibeah
they're
of
not
any of their-
absolved. Justice should be done, but not this way. That's the whole thing. So, for example, like it's like when I've said it before. I'm gonna stop the share. Hold on. I've said it before, but the classic situation in biblical narrative where you bring a case to the king, you bring a case to the king when if you applied the letter of the law, justice wouldn't be done, right? And then you're like, this is what the law says, but justice requires something different. Like like where the woman of was the woman of Tekoa, right? Who she's like, and it's a fake story, right? But she's like, one son killed the other, and now they want to kill my remaining son. But then I won't have any sons. Why do I deserve this? I lost one son, and now I'm going to lose the other son, right? And the point of that is you're bringing it to someone who's taking a step back, saying, what is justice here? What is justice here? Now, justice here would be not just killing people of Giv'ah, but also saying, what do we do to this Levite? It would also be saying, it's not just that Giv'ah is evil, it's that this guy is pretty bad also. And any sort of investigation would have opened the door to thought. Again, I think that the whole point is, yes, the outrage was done, right? There's an outrage and there should be justice. If there's no outrage, then there's no story here. There's no real story here. It's like all one mistake. It's just one error. It's the first listening. It's not, this isn't their only error. Their only error is not investigating. Because it's not just that, oh, if they had investigated, none of this would have happened. You're right? If they investigated, they might have still gone to the next step, right? But every step, they do the wrong thing. First step, they don't investigate, so they don't get a nuanced picture of what happened, right? They don't perhaps take the people who are actually responsible and put them on trial. It's the whole city, right? We don't know if it's the whole city. He pushed her out of the door. Now it is presented like it's the whole city, right? Certainly the whole city didn't take them in, right? But the question is what actually happened, and we're getting a partial story, right? But then it's not just that. It isn't that it's just that mistake. The whole thing, you're absolutely right. The whole thing is not a lesson that we should investigate. That little piece is a lesson that we should investigate, right? I happen to harp on it, but it's not the whole thing is, it just leads to more and more, first of all, collective thinking, and second of all, just outrageous actions. Again, collective behavior on collective behavior. Let's kill all of Benjamin. Hey, we're fighting. Let's kill all their. Let's get rid of all their cities. What in that? Why are you destroying all your cities? Because they're thinking in terms of let's just do it all. Because that's what happens with outrage. With outrage, you're like, no, let them all die. You know, like you're just overtaken by outrage, right? And that's what happens. All of Gibeah has to die. Then all of Binyamin has to die. Then hey, let's kill all the. Hey, we're already killing people. Let's kill everyone from Pilegesh Gilad. Right? Because we need women because of the place we've gotten into. So, okay, so I'm going to move on to the next question or comment. More women who die. I don't know who faculty is. You want to say your name? Sorry, I don't remember. Hello? She's not here. Okay, so more women who die.
I'm here. I just had to unmute myself. It's Susan Aronoff.
Hi, Susan. Hi. More women who die is association with Binyamin. Rachel died delivering Binyamin. Eliah Cohen's daughter-in-law dies in childbirth when a Binyaminite Palit brought the news of the death of Eli's sons. That's an interesting idea, that women dying is something to be associated with Binyamin. That's a nice idea, yeah. Because Rachel dies delivering Binyamin. I didn't remember that it was a Binyaminite refugee who brings the news of the death of Eli's sons. But I'll rely on you.
I didn't remember either until David Silver told me.
And Silver traced the problems with Binyamin back to Rachel stealing Lavan's Trafim. Don't get me started on Trafim. I don't think you need more problems with Binyamin besides Rachel dying. It's pretty clear that what the story wants you to say is the reason what happens because of the Trafim is that she ends up dying. And I think that's enough, to be honest. I think the meaning, and Moshe Mantich also says, the meaning of Atar Yagimi, no, in verse 16 is that these men were so skilled in battle they could shoot accurately even with their right hands tied behind their backs. Yeah, I think that's a good explanation of why it says that they can they can fight left-handed. Danny and Libby asked, is there a connection between the end of the story and Tu B'Av? Well, I mean, it's certainly made rabbinically that this story is connected to Tu B'Av, right? This idea that the women were going out, in their white dress, like that sort of thing. But I don't think that there's an actual connection of this in this particular story because it's not mentioned. What I always find interesting in terms of rabbinic connection to the story is that, of course, when Shaul says to Yonatan, he's really angry at Yonatan because of his friendship with David, and he says, you son of a wayward woman. I don't remember the exact words in Hebrew. I just remember that it was bad, right? And the explanation is, the Midrashic explanation is why? Because Shaul was one of these men who had survived from Binyamin, and he was too shy to grab Yonatan's mother, and Yonatan's mother liked him, so she kind of went after him to, you kidnapped me. Here I am, kidnap me. And it's a really nice, it's a nice way to kind of solve, first of all, to use, because Shaul's shyness is canonical, right? It's in the biblical story that Shaul is shy. And to use that saying, Shaul, he was one of the survivors, but he didn't grab a woman. He wouldn't have done that, right? Instead, she kind of ran after him because she liked him. So that's a and of course seeing the connections between that story and Shaul's story, right? Of course, any early Jewish audience would have seen these connections very, very clearly, including, of course, rabbinic audience, that these connections are very clear, particularly with the Yavesh Gilad, with the idea of, on the one hand, them being killed, on the other hand, Shaul saving them. So I hope that I know that Danny had another question. So
Yes.
Go ahead, Danny.
Yeah, before the question, just the comment that I made, the question is Yavesh Gilad part of Gilad or synonymous with Gilad? Because if it is, Gilad is Ever HaYarden and it's Shevet Gad.
No. So Yavesh Gilad is actually in the south of Gilad. It's southeast of Beit Shan.
Southeast of Bet Shan, okay.
Yeah.
But Bet Shan is this side of the Jordan, and Yavesh Gilad would be the other side of the Jordan.
Yes, it's across the Jordan. It's southeast and across the Jordan.
Never have been anybody left in Yavesh Gilad for Shaul to save if they were all killed in the same generation.
Well, that's the thing, is that how does that work, right? It doesn't make any sense. So it's like I said, you have to kind of, like, for many, many, many reasons, you really do have to read this story as written in response to the Shaul story or in connection to the Shaul story, and not actually preceding the Shaul story. Right. And again, it's written in such an ahistorical way because no one gets a name. Right. Again, I mean, you could say, well, Cohen gets a name, but no, people don't get names. And normally when you're supposed to believe the story, people get names. Right. And here, everyone is anonymous. Right. You're kind of meant to say, OK, maybe I can't put my finger on this as a historical event. Right. But it's meant to say the sort. I mean, it's hard to see how after this story, and then shortly after you have Shmuel, and then Binyamin is a whole tribe with power, right? I mean, like it doesn't work as directly after. You'd have to say, well, several generations have passed, but you can say, right? You can say, well, several generations have passed. You couldn't say, but like you said, Yavesh Gilad, it sounds like they totally wiped Yavesh Gilad out. They killed every married woman. Like what? Who was surviving from Yavesh Gilad? And I'm sure that and I have to look again. I'm sure the Midrash has some kind of explanation. Maybe they'll say, oh, the sons of these women who were taken by the Benjamites came back to settle Gibeah Gilad. I don't know, but it's very hard to actually read it chronologically as making sense, right? So, yes,
Now my very, very general question.
yeah.
I'm wondering if you can take virtually all the stories from Shoftim all the way to the middle of Melachim Aleph as a series of micro histories that are like on the beads of a chain of macro history. Like the story of Pilegesh BaGiv'ah is like the low point of the low point, where you have total anarchy and total evil that is more than matched by the quote unquote justice of the jungle. And it's all because of Be'otam hayamim en melech Israel, ish kayashar
Well, that's the
ben
book of
Yosef.
Judges itself. Like, you don't have to move it beyond. Like, there is
Right.
this whole idea of the Deuteronomic history, but that's not with Judges. So with Judges, it's like with Shoftim, it's a very clear structure of that book, that it's showing what happened without a king.
I'm wondering if there is meant to be a connection when they have the similarity to the story of Sdom. Sdom
Yeah.
is somewhat similar circumstances, because you have these tribal city-states in Canaan, which are somewhat analogous to the anarchy that you have in the time of Shoftim, where every tribe is fighting for itself, and it's as if this Sdom and Pilegesh BaGiv'ah are the natural results of that kind of geopolitical situation.
I think with Stone, you actually have a king. I mean, that's the problem with Stone.
No,
is that,
yeah,
like,
but they're
it's not
city-states.
emphasized that. It's not in that story, right?
Yeah.
So it's there's no king in that story, right? But and you have to kind of like, it's true that for to have a story like that, you either have to not have a king or have a king who is completely guilty of allowing this to happen, right? And that doesn't happen in that story, right? The king is nowhere to be found. There's no mention of a king. I feel like the Dome story is much more about what a complete deterioration of any sort of societal norms, and that's where we start the Concubine of Gibeah story. That's where we start the Pilegesh BaGiv'ah story. In other words, we started with that breakdown. That breakdown carries through in Giv'ah, right? And then in the reaction, we get to what happens when there's no king. In other words, you could have a town where there's a king. You could have one town which is really horrible, right? And that could happen in theory, right? But then the reaction should not lead us to where it does in this story. So I think that, but also you could say maybe with a king, this breakdown, the whole, every person did what was right in his eyes, right? That is absolutely common to Stone and the concubine story, right? That everyone is acting in ways that are, it's so doing what's right in their eyes that to us it's supposed to be bizarre. And again, because we have modern sensibilities, some of these things we don't catch on immediately. Like the whole thing of leaving in the morning, of getting the host permission to leave, all that sort of thing, which we've kind of lost. But it's supposed to really set your teeth on edge from the beginning. No one is acting the way they should. And then like in Stone, like you're absolutely right. In Stone, there's supposed to be hospitality. And there's the opposite of only Lot, who is the stranger there, only Lot is keeping to rules of hospitality. And here it's only the person from Ephraim alone in Giv'ah, the Benjaminite Giv'ah, who's keeping the laws of hospitality, right? So you absolutely have that. The king aspect becomes much clearer once all the different tribes get involved. So you do have this idea, everyone's doing what's right in his eyes, and maybe they wouldn't be acting like that way if there was a king, right? But the real kind of aspect of this is what a king would do is much more prominent in the second part of the story.
Yeah. So, but in terms of the general progression, from Shoftim through Shmuel, you get to the story of Shaul, which is an improvement because now you have a king, but the king is a bit of a barbarian. So he has his climax and then he has his downfall. after Shaul, you've got David, which is a further improvement because he's a better king.
Well, I would call Shaul a barbarian. That's why I'm kind of making a face. That's not his downfall. He's got other things that are his
Yeah.
downfall.
Okay. True.
Yeah.
I'm really oversimplifying things, but you've got David, who also has his climax and something of a downfall. Possibly part of the problem is that he's constantly fighting wars.
Well, I mean, I have to say this, Shmuel, and of course, I, like any other person who teaches Bible or Tanakh, would love to teach Shmuel because Shmuel's amazing, right? That's why everyone has learned it like a million times because everyone wants to teach it, right? But Shmuel is, I always say there are things in it that are like a novel. Like Yonatan has to die because he ate the honey at the beginning, right? Like there are things that work as a book, right? There are other things that are problematic, but like with David, this idea that your downfall will come from within your own house because of this horrible thing you have done, the way it plays out is, from a literary perspective, it's fantastic. I mean, you really see, if you follow the power dynamics between the brothers and you understand what's going on, you're like, wow, yeah, it's really coming to his own house. It's getting him where he lives, because that's David. If you talk about the weakness of the king, so the Shaul's weakness is that he listens to the nation too much. He's not very charismatic, and he bows to the will of the nation, right? He's not sure of himself, and he bows to the will of the nation when he shouldn't, when he should be a strong king. Yonatan's not like that. That's why it's such a tragedy that Yonatan will never be king, because Yonatan would make a great king. We see from the beginning, right? David, his downfall is his love for his family. It's always his love for his family. He's so consistent with it, right? He's so consistent with, he loves his kids, right? He loves his sons, at least. He's a little bit less protective of his daughters, but like but that is his weakness, right? Like when he says, oh Avshalom, and Yoav is like, you got to stop this because he killed your guys. You had a war with him. Like, you can't put your son over the nation this way at this point. You can't go into mourning like this. And he, of course, Yoav always has that kind of role of kind of pulling David back, and that's why David hates him. Like, but he you have that that this is David's big weakness that you can understand. You can sympathize. Of course, you love your children, right? And of course you want them, and this is David's big downfall. And the downfall comes from ruining someone else's family, right? From destroying someone else's marriage and life, of course. Bathsheba and Uriah. He takes Bathsheba, he kills Uriah. You're getting me on this whole thing because also there's a novel written based on Uriah's thing, and it's unfortunately it's not I think by Moshe Shamir, and I actually read the English translation. I have to say it's not particularly well written, the English translation, but it was fun because it's written from the point of view of Uriah. And he doesn't know that he's gonna, he gives the letter to Yoav, and Yoav's trying to figure out, what did you do, right? What did he do? Because he's got to give the letter to Yoav that essentially to send him into battle to die. And Yoav's like, he's asking him, what did you, so what happened when you were the king? He's trying to figure out what he did. But he gives his whole history because Uriah is one of David's champions, right? Bathsheba's father was also one of his champions. Right? And this is true. This is in the verses, right? It's not just that Bathsheba's grandfather is an advisor, right? It's that Bathsheba's father was one of his Giborim. And so is the man she marries. Uriah is also one of his Giborim. And there's this whole thing where and Uriah is a Hittite, right? He's from in the book. He's a Hittite, and he doesn't really fit in. And there's this whole thing, it was a fun read. It was a fun read. But what I'm saying is the most dramatic stuff in that book, you're like, oh, this is a little over the top. And then you go back and it's in the Bible. It's the biblical passage exactly. You're like, oh, come on, that's a little bit much. But no, he just took it straight out. it's a great, let's say Shmuel, you can't really take Shmuel and paste it on something else, is what I'm saying. It's its own thing. You got me going. I just like,
on top of which there's the midrash, there's the midrash of what Natan says to David about Kivsat Arash in the Torah. If you steal somebody's stuff,
right. It's like what do you
fourfold,
mean?
and that's why
Like, you
David
have
has
anyway.
four sons.
Yeah.
So it all worked beautiful. But after David comes Shlomo, which is supposed to be the climax of the climax, a king of peacetime with the Beit HaMikdash and everything. And right after him, it's like back to square one. It's as if that with every climax.
Well, it's like my
whatever's
niece,
happening-
when we asked my niece knew a lot. I said, don't you want to study for the Chidon Tanakh? And she's
Yeah.
like, no. We're like, why? She's like, because I know how it ends and it doesn't end well.
Yeah.
So
It's as if
yeah.
when things are at their best, even then you have to worry that it's all going to fall apart.
Right. Well, that's always right. So
Yeah.
anyway, so thank you for joining me, everyone.
Thanks, Miriam.
I hope you liked it, and thanks for giving me the opportunity to teach this again. I always
We
like
love it.
doing Pilegesh BaGiv'ah.